Welcome back. I hope you had a nice tea break, some interesting conversation. I'll just try and fill in the void while you're finding your seats, doing small talk from the stage. Excellencies, esteemed members, friends of the arts from all over the world, welcome. I am Kristin Danielsen. I am Executive Director of Arts and Culture Norway. And I would like to say hi, hello, to you all. The word hi, it's very nice to know when you're in the Scandinavian countries. It means almost everything. In Sweden, you can even use it for goodbye. I know many of you have traveled far to be here, and you may be a little bit confused about the Nordic countries. Which is which of these 5 countries up north? I don't blame you. It's okay. So Norway is not Sweden. It's the smaller neighbor in the west. And you may have heard 1 or 2 things about Norway. And I think we are sort of on the top ranking list for being the happiest people in the world. When it comes to the status of artistic freedom and freedom of speech, we have pretty good conditions in Norway. We even have it stated in our constitution. In our constitution, Article 100, it says, freedom of speech shall be, directly translated. So the legislation is pretty good. I also run an agency where we have a pretty good funding system. But you know, there are nuances to every nation, and artistic freedom always depends on context. You met a Norwegian by screen yesterday. Her name is Dia Khan. Maybe you didn't know that she was Norwegian because she left Norway when she was very young. She's born in Oslo of Pakistani parents, and she, very early in the 90s, was a pop star, Deepika. But that was a bit too harsh for the Muslim Pakistani community. Her appearance was not accepted by her family and community, so she had to leave Norway. So she is a great documentary filmmaker, internationally awarded, and sadly in spite of being Norwegian. You may also have noticed how our Sami friend in the panel yesterday talked about the colonization of Sápmi. And Sápmi is the nation of indigenous First Nations in Norway. It covers Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. And that is a nation even less known than the Nordics. And I'd like to acknowledge our members of the Sápmi community here today. I'm not saying this to talk badly about my own country or to create problems where there are not. I just like to nuance the image that Shahidul Alam from Bangladesh told us yesterday, that when it comes to international rankings, the Nordic countries are always very at the top of freedom of speech and freedom, whereas Bangladesh was on the list of 136 or something. But you know, back to context, always context. And I would also like to say that sometimes we also may think that something which is basically fuss, like Liva said in the earlier panel, can be mistaken as problems. So I think we also should keep that in mind when we talk about artistic freedom. It's always about the context, because it's different throughout the world. So yesterday we heard too many stories of lived experience of repression and censorship as barriers of artistic freedom. Still, all over the world, we see people finding innovative ways to overcome the same challenges. So the topic for this stellar panel, I have to say, is to hear examples of bridging the gaps, creating opportunities. We see innovative ways of artists and cultural workers involving with the arts communities, working with umbrella agencies to expand the action space for artists and cultural workers. This includes using legal instruments to defend the rights to artistic freedom, using entrepreneurial startup mindsets to expand artistic freedom, focusing on research and documentation, and adopting multiple strategies and approaches to understand what constitutes artistic freedom. We see examples of shifts towards participatory practice or the adoption of social practice to justice and equity. So this panel will discuss approaches and tools and share with us their attempts and successes and perhaps failures towards broadening the opportunities for artists in their communities. That could be locally or it could be globally. It could be in physical venues and it could be in digital platforms. For rights to artistic freedom to be recognized and respected, as we heard earlier this morning, must be acknowledged that we need different models of leadership to bridge the gaps between rights and responsibilities and finding our ways around challenges. We heard some interesting examples from Simon and Liva that was very inspirational. And the four panelists here will continue on this path as they have each, in their way, led the way in finding creative ways to disrupt the system and create systemic change. So I'd like to invite our first panelist up to this podium. Marc Bamuthi Joseph is a spoken word artist and an arts administrator. Bamuthi is a 2017 TED Global Fellow, an inaugural recipient of the Guggenheim Social Practice Initiative, and an honoree of the United States Artist Rockefeller Fellowship. He is also the winner of the 2011 Herb Albert Award in Theatre and an inaugural recipient of the Doris Duke Performing Arts Award. Mr. Joseph's work investigates cultural erasure and Black dignity through performances that range from opera through to film. His opera libretto, We Shall Not Be Moved, was named one of 2017's best classical music performances by the New York Times. His piece, The Just and the Blind, investigates the crisis of over-sentencing in the prison industrial complex and premiered at a sold-out performance at the Carnegie Hall in March 2019. Formerly the Chief of Program and Pedagogy at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco, Mr. Joseph currently serves as Vice President and Artistic Director of Social Impact at the JFK Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C. in the United States. He has stated also that being at the table does not mean systemic change. Welcome, Marc.
Thanks. Hey, everybody. Hello. Okay. Yeah, it's just, we're at an arts thing, right? This is art. Yes? Okay, cool. My last solid cry came about 6 months ago when I first learned about Jamaria Hall. Before he could legally vote, Jamaria was suing the state of Michigan in federal court. He and a group of students from Detroit's worst performing high schools filed a class action lawsuit alleging that the public school system in Detroit, Michigan denies children their constitutional right to literacy under the 14th Amendment. The idea of a constitutional right to literacy broke me open and exposed to the conflicts of my own civic instincts. A right to language, like a right to clean air, or a right to love. How does a black boy become an American? How does he learn his role to play? And what if that role, in part, is to stand in his country's closet, waiting for someone to imagine him as a monster in the dark? If I take everything that I love about being black and everything that I love about being an American, are those things themselves in a right or loving relationship? If not some legal charter, who gives us permission to be our greatest loving selves? In love, there is no lack. Aloft, winged, the coiled tension, unwrung, rewrought, bought in a prism, theorem of blue, white smile. Who am I human if not free? What animal? What beast? Where do I fit if I cannot roam? Outside myself, I lovingly sing myself an anthem for quiet grace. In defiance of silence, we claim the right to love. We who make rage into color, make love into sound. We who see the world as it might be and make it irresistible to the reticent, with or without sanction or permission. And if I die for my right to be loved, should the day come when my light is captured, then Lord, bury me in the struggle for freedom. Greetings. My name is Bamuthi. I'm Anne-Marie Deltour's grandson. I'm Makayi Rising's father. My people come from the unceded territory of the Taino, which is presently known as Haiti. I currently live in the unceded territory of the Nunatchak people, presently known as Washington, D.C. I began my remarks this morning with a piece that I wrote called The Just and the Blind. It examines fatherhood in the age of mass incarceration. The piece was commissioned by the Ford Foundation among several institutional benefactors and premiered at Carnegie Hall. Thanks. You know where I come from? You don't run up on someone from behind without knocking first. So yeah, y'all laugh. So I say all this to say that by virtue of my body, my citizenship, and my relationship to institutional power, I identify as both privileged and hunted. And that intersection, my work is less about safeguarding artistic freedoms and more about the design of freedom itself. Respectfully, I think the notion of safeguarding freedoms assumes a deficit and the ceding of ground to conventional power. I'm not sure that we ever win that battle. People ask me all the time, what can art do to help create an equitable society? But that is the wrong question, and it puts the onus on the wrong people. Living in Washington, D.C., you quickly learn that the artists are the actual politicians, and most politicians are just performance artists. The actual question is, why isn't our healthcare system more like music? Why doesn't our political apparatus operate more like the flow of a poem? In essentially asking how do we defend ourselves, we subordinate our strategic potency, which is the stewardship of the public imagination. A significant reason why the arts are so fragile is because the collective body politic is not interrogating of itself, like Jamaria and his allies, whether or not inspiration is a human right. I'm subverting our leading question slightly here, thinking less of the premise of art making as an economy. Art making as an economy is subject to the macro structures of capitalism and electoral will. However, I do abide by the premise that artist intellect is a natural sociological resource and thus sovereign in its place in the human striving to be. I am asking us to think of ourselves as stewards of an equitable future, with creativity as the primary currency that pays for the future we seek. I ask of this assembled body, can we adjust our gravitational center for this gathering? Can we instead wonder aloud, what steps must we take to position creativity and inspiration as indelible human rights? And then following from that presupposition, can we ask, is it possible to pedagogically choreograph social justice? How great is any country if there aren't great artists living in it? How many artists does it take to make a great country? How do we position artists in the moral infrastructure of our respective nations? Is there an architecture that responds both to the market and an inspirational moral imperative? In the United States, our systems of deportation, our prison system, it's beautifully, if not insidiously designed. We can incarcerate people than anyone in the world, but can we design freedom? By necessity, I have to take an approach to leadership that's centered in the capital of creativity and in the marketplace of American ideals. I understand the co-responsibility of resource and integrity. Behind me, I feel the close footsteps of both my ancestors, to whom I owe a debt, and slave catchers who would have me dead. In my artistic practice, these beliefs impact how I work with classical organizations. At the Kennedy Center, these beliefs have been metabolized as an intentional, creative ecosystem of people, organizations, and programs, all operating under the philosophy that an art center isn't just a place to present prefabricated culture. It is an incubator for a transformative future. Later, I hope to talk about some of the specific tactics that I've spearheaded towards this end. I'm a child of Haitian immigrants. It is tradition to do it all in service of a liberation dream not yet born. Do we want to protect artistic process and output? Yes. But further, we want to intentionally, forthrightly, and legislatively hold art structures and ourselves as accountable for the design of an equitable horizon. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this with us and for rewriting some of the questions and answers already. Let's continue. Alfons Karabuda. Alfons is a musician and expert on artistic rights. He is also very interested in issues related to technology and the arts. Alfons is an accomplished composer with more than 30 years' experience in the music industry. He's a member of the Cultural Committee of the Swedish National Commission for UNESCO, and in 2022 was appointed by the Swedish government as an expert for the report Restart for Culture, Recovery and Development After COVID. Alfons has served as an expert in artistic rights to the United Nations Human Rights Council, which in 2013 included working on the first ever UN report on artistic rights. Alfons is currently president of the International Music Council, the European Composer and Songwriter Alliance, and the Internet Media Foundation. He's executive chairman of Swedish Association for Composers, Songwriters and Lyricists. In addition, he serves as a member of the executive committee of the Swedish Performing Rights Society called STIM, and the Swedish Joint Committee of Artistic and Literary Professionals. He is chairman of Musik Sverige, Music Sweden, and a member of the board of directors of the Royal College of Music in Stockholm. I think I'll stop there because the credentials never end. Also, you were the founder of Alfons Coffee Chain. Maybe that's the most important thing to mention. Alfons, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Some of it was true. Not all, though. Better than the AI description that I got yesterday, because it said I was dead already. And obviously, I'm not. So, good morning, everyone. And first of all, thank you for having brought your experience and skills and knowledge to this event. It has inspired me, and I'm sure everyone else, very much. But I'm not here to be polite, but rather, as the title said, a bit provocative, I guess. So let me try. So bridging gaps, creating opportunities. Creating opportunities by bridging the numerous silos of our arts ecosystem, perhaps. We're so used to silos that we don't really react when some of us at least place art in 7 different art forms, where you can find number 3, literature, number 6, music. You also have 7 elements of arts. You have line, shape, form, space, value, color, texture. How neat. Freedom of speech and artistic freedom is and should, of course, be in the DNA of art itself, and subsequently in all art forms, technical development and innovation, as well as legislation, or financial support maybe from art councils and others. But guess what? We gave artistic freedom a silo of its own. We keep art there, defined as freedom of speech art. That's art that is either provocative and not the entertaining or beautiful art. So we support artistic freedom, but we don't do enough to help it reach outside its silo, and that's the most important part. Freedom of speech, artistic freedom, is not just about the right to say something, but to be given the opportunity to be heard, and preferably by many. Something that is not a given nowadays, and certainly not in the new digital world. A digital world most state policymakers after COVID identified as increasingly important when we would no longer fully trust the physical and analog access to culture. But the same policymakers have yet to clearly contribute to making these spaces enablers for a diversity of musical and art expressions, sustainable businesses remunerating the authors, creating the content that every one of these services build their whole business model upon. With digitalization, we have yet to see the decentralization we hoped for would circumvent, for example, institutional power. Instead, we added a few privately owned giant platforms, deciding what to be heard and seen. Because there are no online public spaces. The ones who can afford pay to be visible, pay to be heard, and often at the expense of others. And what do? We, without the power to financially influence, what do we do to fit in and be given the digital space? Well, we change who we are. We exercise self-censorship, and we do not provoke in any other way than is approved or even expected of us. And we do it in silos. Education is in one silo, even though education is a bridge in itself and could help the rest of us know our rights, know where and how to be better collectively organized and jointly tackle our challenges. Specialized human rights organizations targeting abuse of artistic freedom, they are in one silo, even though they should be an integral part of the arts community itself. Technical development is in one silo, even though every invention meant to use culture as content they build their whole business model upon should be a case of collaborative innovation. Inventing with the arts will make sure the technical solutions are fit for purpose. It also means that we could make sure that the infrastructure is not in the hand of the few, but of the many, giving influence to playlists or even governance of online streaming services through intelligent contracts, commonly known as NFT technology, and a DAO, decentralized autonomous organization. So on an ending note, we need strong individual rights. We need collective strength to successfully exercise these rights. We need collaborative innovation taking us to the future. Information and education will be our vehicle. And considering the level of expertise already deployed in the world by authors, performers, and umbrella organizations, associations, government entities, research centers, institutes, CMOs, private music sector, and data-driven technology providers, there's a unique opportunity to leverage our capacity with a collaborative approach across the ecosystem. A framework that could act as a key differentiator and guiding principle towards a future of the arts where artistic freedom is not just important enough to have a silo of its own, but influencing every silo to the core. Only then will we be able to safeguard and promote the importance of artistic freedom in the way it deserves. And I'll be glad to get back to these opportunities during our talks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alfons. Ownership of responsibility and infrastructure. There's a lot of things to dig into. Moving on to our next speaker, Kathy Rowland. Kathy is the managing editor and co-founder of artsequator.com, which is dedicated to promoting arts criticism in Southeast Asia with a regional perspective. It is committed to develop arts writing and criticism and foster inter-regional links between our stakeholders in Singapore and in Southeast Asia. Kathy is based in Singapore and Malaysia. Kathy has worked in the arts for more than 25 years, running arts programs and arts media platforms. She has edited several volumes of plays by leading playwrights from Malaysia. She has also worked cross-cultural exchanges and art advocacy with a special focus on art censorship. She has produced theatre and visual arts events in Australia, Malaysia, Republic of Korea, Singapore, Thailand, and the US. She is the lead researcher in 5 Art Centres Malaysia's Performing Archive project, and in 2022 she launched the Southeast Asian Arts Censorship Database project to document current restrictions and challenges in the region under the artsequator.com. Welcome, Kathy. Stage is yours.
Thanks, Kristin. Good morning, everyone. Selamat pagi from Malaysia and from Singapore. My name is Kathy, and I'm really happy to be here finally. I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about some of the obstacles and some of the opportunities that I see in the region. And one, I think, to start off is to say that the obstacles sometimes really feel immeasurable. And we've spent all of yesterday talking about many of the different kinds of obstacles and complexities that we face. But speaking to today's provocation, I think that one of the biggest gaps is actually one of the simplest to fix, in fact. And it's simply the lack of reliable data about the way that art censorship is enacted in the region. High-profile cases make the news. They make Southeast Asia famous in the BBC or in CNN. A writer is banned. A monument that has been in the public space for decades is destroyed overnight by vigilante groups. A film is removed from a festival. A pop star is blacklisted because of her revealing outfit. But after the publicity dies, we all move on. Being an artist is precarious work, emotionally, mentally, physically, financially. Rice bowl issues take over very quickly. When responding to attacks, though, what happens is that we become stuck in anecdote and emotion. Instead, we need research, we need data, and we need strategy. Without accurate data to identify patterns and trends of repression in the arts, we can never really develop solid, long-term strategies to support artistic freedom. It is, I believe, the essential first step. So what's behind this gap? It varies across the 11 countries in Southeast Asia, but by and large, the focus of monitoring and advocacy is on press freedom and free expression in the socio-political landscape, which is important in and of itself. However, it does mean that we don't really understand the operation, the scale, the impact that artistic repression has. The lack of dedicated monitoring platforms for the arts also creates a sense of hierarchy, that somehow journalism and journalists play a larger role in our society than the artists and art. But we know this, right? That when you can't print an article in the newspapers or broadcast a report in the radio or on TV, it's that one play or that film or that installation in the precise shade of military khaki that speaks to us and speaks for us. The second problem is that most of the scholarship and the theoretical positioning and the monitoring frameworks on artistic freedom originates from the global north. These are indisputably important to us. Platforms such as Free Muse, Index and Censorship, PEN International are just some of the valuable resources that we refer to in the region all the time. Yet we also need local frames of references that suit the reality on the ground. Nuances sometimes gets lost behind bold-faced headlines. How do we document proxy battles and red herring cases? There are so many small indignities that artists in the region go through and put up with just to bring their work to the public on a regular basis. So we need customized monitoring tools that can capture and document some of these unique challenges that we face. Further, when artists assert our rights to freedom of expression, a common critique that's thrown at us is that somehow this is bukan budaya kita. It's not part of our culture. It's an imported Western concept. This is alien to Asian society. I think that local platforms led by local cultural leaders in country will go some way to defang some of these accusations. But also, how can we build on serious scholarship into indigenous customs, oral traditions, religious texts that enshrine the sanctity of the artist as a truth teller? They must exist. This is not about rejecting George Stuart Mill or Milton or Voltaire, but it's about claiming our own autonomy and not playing into these really tired tropes and binaries of Asian conservatism versus Western liberalism. And indeed, there are emerging voices and organizations that are doing valuable work in the area. And so I think that speaks to the idea of the opportunities and the responsibilities that we have as artists as well. Some of the examples include Freedom Film Network, My Art Memory Project, and Reformatis from Malaysia, and Indonesia's Kuala Sisani, who I believe a representative is here, one of the delegates here today, as well as the work that my own organization, Arts Equator, has been doing. Beyond anecdotal examples, though, our research proves that the methods used to impede artistic freedom has become much more sophisticated, and the agents of repression have become much more diverse. In addition to the state, we have citizen census, art stakeholders, corporations, venues, foreign governments, and even peers acting as agents of repression. The terrain is also unstable. The same work presented in one language will pass unnoticed. In another language in the very same city may lead to a full ban by the state or attacks by vigilantes. A work that has for decades existed in the public space suddenly becomes an object of public anger, signaling a real shift in social and cultural mores. Sometimes it can seem a bit like algebra, a specific combination of a work by artist X about subject Y in a language Z equals mayhem. And despite the Asian stereotype, I really am bad at math, so I am resentful that these things make me think about algebra. It's not all gloom, though. The data reveals that when faced with censorship or challenges, artists exercise their agency and often find ways to fight back. They resist using creative strategies to make their work and to distribute. And sometimes they take a step back as well, because sometimes resistance means a kind of physical danger that is not abstract in Southeast Asia. So constraints on artistic freedom of expression exist everywhere, even in liberal societies. But there are opportunities to push back using strategies that are informed by knowledge and research. It allows us to speak with authority when we bring together all the stakeholders, artists, advocates, government agencies, policymakers, and the public to address an issue that affects us all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathy, and also for the silver lining at the end. Our next speaker is Vicensia Shule from Tanzania. You are a creative producer for film, theatre and online content, but she will attend the summit as a representative of the African Union and speak on behalf of the AU's work. Now that I'm sitting next to you, I can talk, it could be a lot more personal now. We're warming up. You have, with over 20 years of active professional production of experience in the arts, also working as your position at the AU is the Senior Culture Officer, and you have served as adjunct professor at the Nelson Mandela African Institution of Science and Technology, and as a senior faculty member of the University of Dar es Salaam. You have authored more than 30 academic publications in the areas of feminism, arts, culture and creativity, and has also worked as a consultant, analyst, campaign initiator and strategist in the civil service, civil societies, public and private sectors. And for over 2 decades, you look much younger than the CV adds to. You have been conducting capacity enhancement training at community, national, regional and international levels in the areas of creative communication, restitution of heritage resources, media, women, politics, education, agriculture, health and tourism. You have also served in various boards of prominent institutions locally, regionally and internationally. Very warm welcome. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kristin, for the introduction. And good morning, Excellencies, colleagues, and supporters in the freedom and human rights movement building. Maybe I should start my presentation with the question which Alfons said. Are we doing enough in the area to bridge the contextual freedom and rights of expression for artists, creatives, and cultural practitioners? Yes. Speaking from the African Union Commission, I should at the very beginning say we are a policy institution where we mostly formulate policies, legal instruments to support arts, creative industries, and economies, heritage, and other sectors related. If we look at the documents we have 3 documents where we see clearly that the foundation of freedom and rights of expression of artists and creative people are well articulated. We have the Charter for African Cultural Renaissance, but also we have the revised Plan of Action on Cultural and Creative Industries, and we have a model law on the protection of cultural property and heritage. So if you look at the framework of these 3 instruments, you find that the objectives of having these documents comes from the premise that the freedom of expression and cultural democracy are inseparable concepts, and they're important for social and political democracy. So, even when you go further to the chapter, it clearly, in one of its principles, is to respect the freedom to create and liberate creative genius in the people. And when we look at the revised Plan of Action on Cultural and Creative Industries, I should mention that this instrument is still a draft and will be presented for review and endorsement this year. One of the principles of this plan of action is to protect cultural rights and freedom of expression as the basis of creating stronger creative economies. The list of how these rights are stipulated in the core documents is very long. If we look at the African model law on the protection of cultural property and heritage, it is defined clearly that member states should ensure the protection of intellectual property rights and human rights with regards to property and heritage, which means not only the documents are stipulating how these rights should be protected, but they are giving support to our 55 member states on how to go about it. So what opportunities are available? We know what COVID has done to our economies and the creative people. We did a study on the promotion of decent work in African cultural and creative economy. There are areas which were being identified as very key for further intervention. We did this study in collaboration with ILO and UNESCO. The first area is the condition of migrants and foreigners involved in the culture and creative industry value chain. The other area is the fair remuneration in the context of digitalized cultural and creative economies. And the other area is the range of labor and social welfare provision on the legal area, whereby cultural workers, freelancers, cultural professionals are being recognized as employees. So when we are talking about the freedom, we consider that income, stable income, good, decent working environment as part of the rights and freedom of our people. Now, the key question, how do we navigate between all these dimensions? It's important that at the national levels, to promote these cultural rights, especially freedom of cultural expression, as a basis for production, distribution, and consumption of our goods, creative goods in our member states. We need also to support our member states at the national level to build this legal instrument and domesticate, where necessary, those instruments which protect the creative people. So there's an opportunity to bridge that gap of freedom of expression and artistic freedom, recognizing that, as Marc said, inspiration is a human right. So we should consider what the creative people are doing as human right first, so that we can be able to protect them. We are remaining with a very big question. How do we collectively bridge that gap of freedom of our fellow creative people in the vulnerable environment in the continent, where there's a lot of civil wars, coup d'etat, and other places where peace is a scarce, expensive mineral? We normally forget the continent has several peace and security issues, and it's our responsibilities collectively, North and South, to support these artists who are in vulnerable peace environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicensia. And thank you, all four of you, for sharing your experiences, for your introductions and your provocations. They are vastly different, aren't they? I'd like to pick up on what you said at the very end. What we heard yesterday is that art is never a crime, it's a human right. And you, Marc Bamuthi, said imagination is a human right. So it's about rights, but it's also about the ability to use that freedom where you find it. And as I said initially, the question of artistic freedom, it varies and it differs in different contexts. And as you sit here, you, at least geographically, represent 4 different continents. And how do we tackle that? There will be different narratives, different situations, different problems. So how would you say that we have to think about artistic freedom in a context?
It's important to understand artists and creative people in some of the African countries. What they're fighting is general movement to be independent as a country, and they're not fighting for their freedom as artists. So we need to understand the layers of fighting for this freedom. So artists are now saying, as a country, we are not liberated. We are not independent. We don't have freedom as a country, as a nation. So they get involved in fighting for the general freedom. So it's our responsibility now to support them, to just also, after this bigger movement of freedom, them to be safe. So in the war zone, for example, the issue is not, as an artist, I want my freedom. Can be described as selfishness, because even your parents who are not artists are fighting for the freedom. So the timing on when we are requesting and pushing for the artistic freedom is fundamental. As we are being saying, freedom is not universal for the artist. It's contextual. So when do we fight for the artistic freedom, maybe in the north, is different from when we should be fighting for the artistic freedom in some of the southern countries. So most of the time we forget, and we think these artists are not in the front line fighting. They are no longer maybe working on their work as an artist. They're in the forefront fighting for their countries. So sometimes we can remember other countries, not in Africa, which are in war, and we acknowledge, but we forget artists in the war zones in Africa. So it is a matter of reflecting now by saying, Ukraine, the situation there, it might be the situation in many African countries. So we take responsibility equally. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to the US. You offered a very interesting image of the politicians being the performing artists and also the artists having real political power. I wanted also to remind us what happened after or during the Black Lives Matter movement, where they took down symbols and statues of previous slave owners. And there was a piece in The Economist where there was a trial of, I think that was in Bristol, where they took down the statue of Colston. And the people who took it down, they were acquitted because of the situation and the history around why they did it. So civil society and artists are actually more powerful sometimes than the system of law or politics. Could you offer a little bit more background to what you gave us?
Yeah, I mean, I think the word power is appropriate, and I'd like to just spin that word around a little bit, because I want to center artist intellect and artist disposition as a true source of power outside of military power, outside of economic power, outside of legislative power. The power of the public imagination and the access to creative will is an underspoken, underutilized public resource. The public imagination is actually the source of true power across the human spectrum. We have riddled ourselves into thinking about the physics of finance or the physics of the military as the true gravity of the human condition, when in fact the opposite is true. I know that politics or religion or the economy are, along with marriage and other civil institutions, are ordering entities. But the reason why I started my remarks the way that I did is because I wonder about yearning. I wonder about creative yearning as the actual resource to be mined in order to pay for the future that we seek. So when I think about power, particularly in this time of crisis, I think about the power to design the future. And who has that? Because it is not legislators. As a matter of fact, many legislators, and certainly many folks in the military-industrial complex, are actually working in order to suppress an equitable future. So who designs the future for us? Who are the architects of our collective humanity? Who are the stewards not only of the public imagination, but inspiration itself? And why don't we think of that power as an equitable entity in terms of the human enterprise? There are many of us in this room that work for NGOs or have nonprofits, and though they are cultural nonprofits, generally speaking, we have technologists on our boards. We have bankers or financiers on our boards. We have lawyers on our boards. If I took the Fortune 500 in the United States, how many artists do you think collectively are on the boards of the top 500 corporations in the U.S. or in the world, for that matter? We don't position artists as leaders, but we take folks in these destructive industries and we put them over our cultural institutions. So I think the question really is, why aren't we, as creative people, subverting these notions of power itself? And while we're at it, why don't we take our art spaces and use them as incubators for a future that includes us all?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Alfons.
Can I just add?
Yeah.
Sorry. Oh, sure.
For optimism. Alfons, please.
I just want to add one aspect to this. We talk about us or artists having power, but I think we should acknowledge the fact that it's the ones not having power but still doing it, still fighting for artistic freedom, freedom of speech, dying, nothing happening, another one fighting without having power. That builds up to this collective arts community power in a way. So we shouldn't forget the fact, if it was that easy just going out and now I'm an artist, I have power, that's not the case. It's much tougher than that. I just want us to remember everyone doing this without any reward.
True. Kathy, I want to talk to you about this because you live in a part of the world where you see real censorship. And you also talked about sometimes the discussion on artistic freedom can be an abstract discussion in other countries. It's not very abstract in your region.
Not always, yeah.
Would you like to share some of your objectives?
Yes, but maybe first if I can just respond to what Marc was saying, this thing about power, right? To me, censorship is about fear.
Yes.
Because they fear what we have and they fear what we say. So, you know, I think it is the sense that we are always a bit caught on the back foot and we're always a bit defensive. But the fact is that they're not out there censoring accountants.
Right.
They're censoring artists.
Right. Real talk.
Yeah. I think the science, that the math people are getting it a bit bad for me today. A lot of trauma from math classes. So it is. It can, you know, not be abstract in terms of like the actions that can be taken against artists. But I also don't want to kind of feed this idea that Southeast Asia is some kind of, you know, space where there is utter suppression of artists. There is a lot of agency. There is a lot of spaces, and artists use those spaces very well. our relationships with the state and with some of the cultural agencies are not always antagonistic. I think that also, comes across, that needs to come across as well, that it's not as simple as, one bad power with one good power, for example. I did, you mentioned just now about what the spaces that we have are, and about artistic freedom of expression being perhaps set in a context. I do want to say that I don't think that artistic freedom of expression is contextual. I think that it is an absolute in some ways. I feel that maybe the timing of it might be contextual. Speaking from cases that we have in our society, there have been times when perhaps a particular work might not be there are wider issues, there are real conflicts and potential violence that means that maybe that work might not, or that artistic freedom at that point might not work for a while. But I absolutely do not think that it is contextual because we're in Asia, so we should have less freedom of expression.
Absolutely. How does this, please.
Maybe it's very difficult to speak for a continent with 55 countries.
We understood.
But please bear with me at this particular juncture. Maybe when we're discussing about power, it's an issue of resources, position, and access to decision making, and other factors which together we talk about power. And Kathy, when it comes to freedom, I believe artistic freedom is incomplete where there's no peace. So peace is a fundamental ingredient for building system for freedom to exist. We can't isolate artists from their society because that becomes something different. If they are a member, artists and creative people are members of that community which is fighting for peace, they are part of the process. So the issue of them being free alone and leaving the rest, that is the contextuality we are talking about. So when we are talking about freedom, we go to the next level. Access to basic needs, where to sleep, what to eat, what to wear, where to get these fundamental basic rights. Are these people, as artists, have access just to basic? Are they affording living decent life? If the community is not affording to live decent life,
Yes.
how can these artists who are coming from the same community afford decent life? So if you ask these artists, what comes first? You having stable income to eat or fighting for the freedom? What answers are you expecting them to give? If there's no freedom, even in the jail, they say, you can access food, a place to sleep, right? And you'll get uniforms there. So freedom now is missing. But in the community, there's another jail there. If you don't have food, you'll die.
Yeah.
So it depends on how we articulate these issues of the artistic freedom. I'm not saying it's not important. It's fundamental. But when we are discussing with our people about these rights, they know. But they will ask you, what should we do in the situation our tomorrow is not safeguarded?
Yes.
Our parents, our relatives are not safeguarded. We are in constant movement seeking for refugee in a neighboring country. Just coming, looking for where they can be taken as immigrants. Legal immigrants, not illegal immigrants. So I think the contextuality is very important.
Yes.
Because African countries are different. Some are on the top of fighting for the freedoms because the GDPs are very high there. The others, they are very low. So we should not underestimate the contextual and the timing factor for when we should push for this agenda. Thank you.
Contextual.
Yes. Good.
Context, timing, And also, Alfons, you were talking about silos.
Yeah.
And you sort of said that we've put artistic freedom into a silo too,
Yes.
in a sort of theoretic, maybe Northern European thinking. How does that respond?
No, but I think that when you talk, I so much agree with you now also, because we've also talked, I often met the fact that either you do real art and you're a real artist, or you're interested in money, remuneration. I mean, that's the commercial art, that they don't work together. But what you say is exactly what it's about. It's about our rights to be able to be professional, to be able to actually choose artistic freedom. Because you have to be able to have that choice. And just as an example, we talk about Europe, we have to influence each other, giving best examples. I think the best meeting I ever had in trying to get the copyright directive in EU forward was when a colleague of mine, when I was able to bring Paul Brickhill from the Harare Book Cafe, where they have this community of almost 5,000 different events a year. And when he said exactly what you said, the importance of having fair remuneration in order to actually have artistic freedom, something happened. Okay, so they're not in silos. You actually need both. And I think we need to start looking at things not being human rights, artistic freedom, commercial, art. They're all just interlinked.
We're using these words interchangeably, and you're absolutely right that they can't be used in the same way. I'm reminded of my son, who's 21 and is a university student and a young filmmaker. And he made his first short film last summer, and was starting to submit it to film festivals. And even as he's submitting the films to festivals, he's like, I don't care what they think. I love my film. I love my film. And I said to him, great. You don't have to care what they think, but you do have to distinguish whether you want to be an artist or whether you want to make art. Because to be an artist is also to be concerned with the economy. Because though I love him, I'm going to kick his ass out of my crib at some point, right? To make art is probably more to be concerned with some of the more, let's call them abstract or conceptual definitions of artistic freedom that I laid out, which are more closely tethered to the public idea of art and who authors the creative landscape, who articulates the creative horizon, who sets the cultural edge. That is the artist, kind of capital A's, responsibility within the course of, I think, our sociological ecology. That is what the artist's intellect is responsible to do. The artist's intellect authors the social horizon. The artist as a person inside of the economic machine, and the artist is probably the person that we're referring to when we think about artistic freedoms, when we're thinking about cultural erasure, when we're thinking about a kind of deployment and chess piece in the broad in these broader macro infrastructures. They have a different kind of assignment. And that assignment lives at the intersection, I think, of all these definitions that we're speaking of. But it's important, I think, to name these different levels of deployment, of space, of ideological space, and of sociological responsibility, because they do correspond to different aspects of the word freedom and the concept of freedom itself. There are some of us that are fighting as instruments of the macroeconomy. And there's some of us that are creating power structures outside of that economy. And because these economies and because these governments typically fail the majority of us on the planet, it's it's incredibly important for the identity of the artist's intellect to be the author of structures outside of what it is that we're speaking of here. That's, I think, the place where true freedom resides.
Right. I'll give you the word in a second, Alfons, but I'd also like to open up for questions over the next 15 minutes or so. So someone be ready with the microphones. But Alfons, please.
No, I just want to say that I said I would talk about some of the opportunities. Obviously, technology is one. We heard earlier today that AI will happen. Technology is here, sure. But how would it have been if we didn't have activists? Some of us have been in making sure that technology is available. It's not perfect. And what happens now is that new ways for finding this new economies, it's already happening. And we're looking at new regions to exploit with new technology. So it's extremely important being in the forefront of that development so you get the benefits of that. Because it's happening right now. Being able to actually have closed infrastructures in one country, one region, and it's happening fast. And others are looking very interestingly into these regions to make sure that they get the new minerals or
the intellectual mineral.
So we need to help each other in that, I think.
Right. Very good. I've seen hands. What we'll do is that we'll take 2, 3, 4 comments and then you answer. So could we have a microphone here and then there? Yes. Oh, you start there. Good. You start. There you go.
Thank you for your thoughts and your provocations. Some couple of points. One is I'm hoping that we can move beyond binaries, because I'm hearing a lot of binaries that we need to nuance, right? We need some nuanced ideas around whether power, freedom, who is the artist, who has the power, who doesn't have it. And so I want to come back to the question, because I think it's trying to see the name now, Marc, about the power. I want to come back to power because, you know, here we have a lot of societies, a lot of organizations that are about, we're giving them power, resources to mobilize, to give others and all of that. But I want to hear in what ways are the artists having the power, having that intellectual driving the narrative and all that. In what ways are we bringing that back into what we're doing or creating that space, getting out of the way and letting them do it, right? Because I think that's very critical, right? Whether as custodians and stewards of resources like Canada Council for the Arts and other kind of councils that are here, in what ways are we creating that space to get out of the way and give those things to these people that we say they have the actual power? That's one. Number two is in your positions, and I'm seeing big names here and great things that you're doing. How are you erasing yourself and decentering yourself and recentering or recentering those that are really on the margin? Because we can speak all these great, you know, beautiful things, but I'd like to see what are those approaches that you're all doing individually. And maybe that can help us to kind of start thinking in our various pockets and spaces. Thank you.
Could we have a microphone in the front here and then one over here? And then number 4 there, and then we'll come back, okay? One on the front.
Hi, Chris Storch from the West African Mobile Academy and Uppsala 2029. I'm really, really touched by this question of peace. Without peace, there are no freedoms whatsoever. Not only artistic freedom, but freedom to survive, freedom to make love, freedom. These things don't exist. So peace must be the essential aspect of it. So I wonder if you can imagine, and I ask all of you because you come from 4 continents and you come with different kinds of conflict in your societies. Some are directly military, some are racial conflicts, some are class conflicts. There are things that are going on. can we imagine arts, culture, and security? What possibilities do exist to codify arts and culture as conflict transformers? Is it possible to have something like arts and culture white helmets who are prepared to move in, certainly not in the moment of conflict, because that's ridiculous, it doesn't function, but before, in disarming conflict or in healing afterwards, to codify this and to turn this into a very concrete thing that even our political systems might be able to understand, because I'm responding a little bit to Marc and the military-industrial complex and the control it has over our life. I don't want artists just to be on the boards of the Fortune 500 companies. I want artists to be in NATO. To take an extreme example. Do you imagine that it would be possible, and I'm looking especially at my colleague here from Africa, do you imagine that arts could actually be, I don't want to instrumentalize them, but to give artists opportunities to do what they do best, which is to create a context of peace, which then can lead to artistic freedom and also put the artist at the center of it, which I think might be very useful. I just wonder if any of you could respond to that idea. Do we have that big of a function? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We take 2 more comments and try and be a little bit brief because they need to be able to answer as well. So I have one over here and there was one woman at the back. Sorry, Tony, I have to wait.
Thank you. First off, thank you so much. It's been a very interesting but also thought-provoking, in a very good way, conversation. So I just want to give you my gratitude for presenting and sharing. So my question is very specific, and it goes to Marc, because you said we don't position artists as leaders. In a Sami community, the artists are the leaders. And this is because leader in Sami culture comes from the word, it's put together by the word for movement, to move. So in a Sami way of thinking, to be a leader is the one that moves forward the thinking and then pull other people along with them to put that thinking into practice. And so my question is very specific. Do we perhaps need to change how we view what a leader is, internationally, globally? Because I think today a leader is someone that holds space to maintain the status quo. And perhaps that is something that we should open discussions about. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is to Vicensia Shule. It's here. I'm wondering if there is a possibility for us to think beyond the tendencies to prioritize problems. What I mean by that is, our questions for freedom of expression, could they be the cause for the lack of freedom for survival? If there was freedom for artistic expression, could that facilitate the freedom for survival? I'm thinking this because maybe war and civil wars that are happening in Ethiopia, for example, is a lack of imagination and a lack for people and artists to express themselves. And if we facilitate that artistic freedom, can that also be a solution for facilitating freedom for survival? Thank you.
Thank you so much. We now have 6 minutes and 35 seconds to answer this. Who would like to go? There was a couple of questions directly to you, Marc Bamuthi, and for you, Vicensia. So, Marc, please.
Well, okay, so I'll answer this question. Yeah, sure. Yes. I think it's actually been said by everyone here. The danger, and maybe I'll address my colleague here. I think part of what we were attempting to do, rather than speak in binary terms, is actually define the many ways, or at the very least speak to the very many ways that we're using these terms and trying to unpack and avoid conflating these various these various meetings. I think that the similarity here, that the bridges between these questions, and especially this question about decentering an individual in relationship to institution, is that all of us are oracular, all of us are bridges, oracles, fences, all of us are representatives for a broad swath of people. We've only met today, so I don't really know like your background, but I began to, as part of my biography, talk about being from the poorest country in the hemisphere. So my folks did not immigrate to the United States, one, for me to forget, two, for me to not be awesome. So I have a particular responsibility there that doesn't actually kind of arrive in my personal success. It arrives in my ability to ensure and incubate the success of as many folks as possible, which maybe then goes here to this question of peace. And again, I think it's something that many on the panel have articulated. I would not frame this idea of like the artists as white helmets. I would not talk in those terms. The artists are doing it. It's the rest of y'all that are the problem. So it's true. So what we don't want to do, I think, is take the artist and put them back inside of this context of military conflict. The artist is the vanguard. The artist is the leader. And while we are talking about a kind of, Maslow pyramid of needs, and we are talking about peace as an essential element, the desire here is to have a different kind of gravitational pull, a different kind of gravitational force, which all of us at some point have been advocating for. The question is, as my colleague here stated, how do we as a body orient ourselves towards the gravity of art rather than attempting to suck art into these macro problems?
Thank you. Vicensia.
Quickly, I think on the issue of white helmet, I think we have blue helmets on the cultural protection, and they always go after what has happened. So perhaps the artists they are human beings. They might go in the front line, and then they will go after for the interventions. But I think artists and creative people have this transformational power, and perhaps what it lacks is they lack structures to institutionalize such power, so that power still remains imaginative. So we have artists in our homes, on our screens, but they do influence us on some behavior to buy, what not to buy. But when it comes to structures to change political structure, maybe that is what is missing. Having systems which will transform what artists and creative people have might be a solution. Okay, tendencies to prioritize problems. This is a human nature. When we wake up in the morning, we just discuss what we don't have. I don't have bus fare. I don't have school fees. I don't have this. This is a social prioritization. We wake up with problems in the morning, and we don't run away from them. We address them. So having problems as priority in your list is what keeps you going to work. If you don't have problems for money, maybe you will be dead by now. So we should not think prioritizing problems is African problems. It's a global system of making the world move. So it's not a problem. So what I'm saying is peace and security globally takes a big piece of our budget. So by the time we decide that peace and security is not a priority, actually, it's the biggest problem, peace and security globally. And that's why we budget too high. Maybe it's the time we'll be having resources to budget for culture and creative industries. Alfons knew tech colonies are coming. Maybe that is what we are saying. How can we deal with these new tech colonies? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give Alfons the word, and I'll let you have the final word, Kathy.
Very briefly, I wouldn't put the helmets on because there's no respect for them and our colleagues in press or media because they are shot, so we're making them targets. Unfortunately, that's the world we're living in now. And just to respond, what we are doing with our power, first of all, I'm a composer and I'm entrusted by my colleagues. You should grab the power. Get as much power as you can and try to help and do what you're supposed to do to lift your community. Yep. But from a personal view, I'm just going to, you asked us personally what we do in order to leave this power or open up for others. I work in creating decentralized system, getting the individuals to get the power, and I'm resigning from my positions next year. So that's my answers.
Kathy, please.
Yeah, I want to round back to your suggestion. I think that that's really palliative, and I think it's actually terrible. I don't know if any of you were here for the Ithaca conference in Malta, where we had a presentation about the use of glass blowing to help American soldiers deal with their PTSD. And I remember thinking, what a terrible use of the arts. Why are we not using our talent to actually prevent these kinds of wars and conflicts in the first place? Yep. We should be not plugging into problems that have been created by the world structures that, and playing into them. We should be using our power really to prevent those. And then I want to round back to this question about, peace. Respectfully, absolutely, peace is necessary not just for artists but for everyone. I think I talked about the rice bowl issues that in the region we faced, but I think that I want to say this delicately, that to acknowledge that personal safety, myself, my colleagues in my work area, everyone, our personal safety should be paramount, right? We don't want to ever put artists or ourselves in danger, but to say that, so the peace is a condition for artistic freedom, but the lack of peace shouldn't be used as a reason to prevent or to deny or to somehow water down artistic freedom.
Thank you so much.
Word.
I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for the opportunity of moderating this panel. I would have wanted a full day more. We only scraped the surface, didn't we? Thank you for doing what you are doing. Thank you for being activists in your daily lives. Thank you for inspiring us. And thank you for keeping up so long so that I don't have time to wrap up this panel, because that is simply impossible. We are back to seeing artistic freedom is always a matter of context, and thank you for taking us around the globe. There will be no freedom without peace, and that is also, our security is paramount, but we have to safeguard artistic freedom. We cannot put it into a neat little silo, and it's also about the ability to use that freedom. And thank you also for all your silver linings, showing us opportunities, believing in the power of the artists. Because who designs our future? Most likely artists will. Thank you. Thank you.